Before we get into today's case, make sure to subscribe. By joining this community, you'll have access to detailed investigations, exclusive insights, and updates on the most disturbing cases that demand to be uncovered. In a quiet town of Silver Lake, Michigan, where everyone knows everyone, a young woman disappears without a trace. What happened to Sarah Granger, and who can you trust when nothing is what it seems? It was a question that would haunt Sarah Granger's family for years. Sarah Granger, a 26-year-old accountant, was last seen leaving work on a cold winter evening in 1994. Her disappearance seemed like an accident at first. After all, she'd been talking about a road trip she planned to take. But something didn't feel right. Her family hadn't heard from her, and her car was left abandoned in the parking lot, keys inside. What was worse, there were no witnesses and no one had seen her leave the office. The town buzzed with whispers, wondering if it was a random act of violence or something far worse. When Sarah's mother, Judy Granger, reported her missing, the police were quick to respond. It was their job, after all, but the disappearance didn't seem like an emergency yet. Sarah could have run away or stayed out late, they thought. But as days passed, worry turned into fear, and fear turned into dread. What happened to Sarah Granger? After several weeks with no leads, the case took an unexpected turn. A man, Charles Williams, serving a sentence in a nearby state prison, sent an anonymous letter to the Silver Lake police. In his confession, he claimed that he had been involved in Sarah's disappearance, saying he had mistaken her for someone else. His story seemed to fall apart quickly when the authorities began to investigate. Charles described picking Sarah up near her office after she had been walking alone. He said he thought she was a woman from his past, someone he had a complicated history with. But there was no record of such a person, and Sarah had no idea who Charles was. Nonetheless, the police took his confession seriously and set out to find him. But they didn't know that this seemingly random confession would open up a door to a much bigger mystery. Charles Williams was no stranger to crime. A known petty criminal, his criminal past was filled with lies, deceit, and violent behavior. His confession was cryptic, but after further investigation, the police realized the shocking truth. He had confused Sarah Granger with another woman, someone who bore a striking resemblance to her. As detectives dug deeper, it became clear that this wasn't just a case of mistaken identity, something much more sinister was at play. It seemed that Sarah had been caught in the crossfire of a deeper, darker web, a network of criminals and conspirators. The search for Sarah was no longer just about finding a missing woman. It had become a race to uncover the true motive behind her disappearance. The police tracked down Charles Williams, bringing him in for questioning. But what they found in his past was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Charles had been part of a criminal syndicate that was involved in human trafficking. His confession was just the surface of the story. The truth was more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Charles had been coerced into participating in a larger operation that trafficked women who resembled others for various nefarious purposes. As detectives pieced together the evidence, they realized that Sarah was not an accidental victim. The syndicate had been targeting women for years, but Sarah had never been the intended victim. This revelation sent shockwaves through the town of Silver Lake. Sarah was no longer just a missing person. She was part of a much bigger, more dangerous situation. But as they dug deeper, the investigators began to uncover something that would change everything. The investigation into Sarah's disappearance took a dark turn when it was discovered that Sarah had been closely connected to a man named Jason Reed. Jason, an ex-boyfriend, had been part of an underground network that, unknown to Sarah, was involved in shady dealings with the criminal syndicate. Jason's connections were what had inadvertently put Sarah in harm's way. Jason was nowhere to be found when the police sought him out for questioning. But what they did find was even more disturbing: a hidden phone with messages between him and people from the criminal syndicate. Jason had been a double agent, involved in the trafficking operation, but playing the role of a good citizen while doing so. As the investigation deepened, the lines between victim and perpetrator began to blur. Sarah had been caught in the crossfire of a larger scheme she had no knowledge of, but she was also unknowingly entangled with a criminal network that had manipulated her life. Just when the case seemed to be nearing its end, the police received an anonymous tip. A woman named Amelia Davis, who had been a victim of the trafficking ring years ago, came forward with a shocking revelation. She claimed that Jason Reed was not just involved in the trafficking operation, but he had been the mastermind behind Sarah's abduction. Amelia's testimony revealed that Jason had been using Sarah's resemblance to another woman to create an alibi for his operations. Jason had targeted Sarah specifically, knowing that she would never suspect him of being involved in criminal activity. The investigators now had a clear suspect, Jason Reed. But there was one problem. He had disappeared. Jason Reed's disappearance sent the police into a frantic manhunt. They had to track him down before he could flee the country. The pressure was on, and every minute counted.
If you're invested in uncovering the truth, don't forget to subscribe. You'll receive notifications about new cases, deep dives, and the ongoing pursuit of justice. This is the place for those who are committed to understanding the real stories behind the headlines.
The case was no longer just about solving a kidnapping case. It had turned into a race to stop a criminal mastermind from escaping justice. But as they searched, new revelations about Jason's history emerged. He wasn't just a low-level criminal. He had been orchestrating multiple abductions across the region, using his charm and manipulation to lure women into his traps. His escape was becoming more certain by the day. Would the police catch him before he disappeared forever? As the investigation continued, more shocking details came to light. The criminal syndicate had connections all the way back to Silver Lake. High-ranking individuals in the town had been secretly protecting Jason and his operations. The police began to suspect that Jason had been using his local connections to cover up his tracks. As the town's darkest secrets began to surface, the community was rocked. People who had once been trusted members of society were now implicated in a scheme far larger and more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. Silver Lake was no longer just a quiet, peaceful town. It had become a center of criminal activity. As the investigation into Sarah's disappearance continued, her family faced the harsh truth that their daughter had been the victim of a complicated crime. Sarah's mother, Judy Granger, struggled with the realization that her daughter's kidnapping had been the result of a series of manipulations, lies, and betrayals. Judy had to come to terms with the fact that Sarah had unknowingly been involved in a dark world that no one could have ever predicted. The more she learned, the more she realized that her daughter's life had been a victim of circumstances beyond her control. The emotional toll on Judy and the rest of Sarah's family was overwhelming. They were no longer just grieving the loss of their daughter, they were grappling with the truth of what had happened to her. As the search for Jason continued, the police made a chilling discovery. A warehouse, hidden on the outskirts of town, was found to be the center of the trafficking operation. Inside, the authorities discovered evidence that linked multiple victims to Jason and his syndicate. It was clear that Sarah had been just one of many women targeted by this operation. But as the investigation deepened, a shocking new detail came to light. Jason had been planning to disappear permanently, using his connections and the chaos of the situation to flee the country and leave behind a trail of destruction. The hunt for Jason Reed was more urgent than ever. Would they catch him before it was too late? What do you think? How far would you go to uncover the truth if you were in Judy's shoes?
Thank you for watching. If you want to continue exploring these complex and unsettling cases, hit that subscribe button. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and be part of the journey as we seek the truth together. Check out the next video to know how we uncovered the truth. See you there.